Masechet Baba Kama Daf Lamed Vav. With this daf we complete the third perek and we will begin the fourth perek. The Mishnah mentioned the case of two animals running after one animal, and one of them gores it, but we're not sure which one, and both animals are owned by the same person. And so the Mishnah ruled, Hayu shenehem shalish echad, shenehem hayavim. We're not sure what this means, right? We have some sense of it, since they're owned by the same person, so then that person has to pay. With that we got, but what does that mean that both of them are liable? What kind of cases are talking about? Shor tam, shor mu'ad? So we begin by assuming that's talking about a shor tam, and shenehem means that the owner will be liable to pay from either this or that animal, such that, for example, let's say one gets lost, so then the nizak can come and say, well, that one's lost, but pay me from the other one. Since in a shor tam, the owner only has to pay from the value of the goring animal. In this case, since it's one or the other, he has to pay from one of them. That seems to be what shenehem hayavim means. But that is, we challenge that. Amar le Rava me parzika le Rav Asher. Shema mina shevarim tamim sheziku rasa mize gober rasa mize gober Rava me parzika es Rav Asher. Should we conclude from here that in the case where there's many animals, that one of them is a shor tam that actually did the damage, and there's other animals like this case, so the victim can decide if he wants to get it from this one or from that animal. He can collect from any one he wants. He can just choose, and that would mean also that if one gets lost, so he said, well, that one got lost, I'll take from another one. That shouldn't be the case. It doesn't make sense, because the rule is in a shor tam, the mazik is only liable to pay from the value of the body of the animal that did the goring. If that particular animal is lost, the nizak should get nothing. And so in this case, if we're not sure which animal it was, then the mazik should be able to say, you prove that it was this one, and then you can collect. If you can't prove which one it was, then you should not be able to collect anything. So why should he be able to choose whichever one he wants? Even if one gets lost, he could say, well, I'll take the other one. We don't understand the logic. So instead, Rav Asher says, all right, hacha b'ma'askinan b'mu'adin. We're talking about mu'ad animals. And now we understand it better, because a mu'ad animal, the liability is not limited to the body of the goring ox, but rather mu'ad has unlimited liability. And so that makes sense that he would have to pay from any animal that he has. This one, it wasn't this one, that one. Even if it was not the animal that actually gored, that doesn't matter. The owner would still have to pay. But we reject that. Even mu'adin ema sefa. We have to be consistent and look at the next clause in the Mishnah. Haya echad gadol v'echad katan. Hanizak omer gadol hizik. V'mazik omer lo ki ela katan hizik. Hamosim achavero alav hare'aya. Ibe mu'adin ma'e nafka lehmineh. Sof sof temet Torah ma'alya ba'e leshalomeh. The next case is if there's two animals, but one is big and one is small, and they're owned by the same person, and one of them gored a victim. Then Nizak claims that it was the big one. That way he can collect more money. The mazik claims, no, it was the small one, because that way his payment is limited to the amount of the small one. And the rule is the nizak has to prove that it was the big one, otherwise he can't get paid from the big one. Now, if the resha was mu'ad, and this one is then case is also mu'ad, then what difference does it make whether it's the big one or the small one? In the end, the mazik has to pay from the full value of the ox. That he has to pay a full amount of damage, and maybe it's a lot of damage that he did. Maybe the victim ox was very, very expensive, and in that case the owner would have to pay 2 oxen, 3 oxen, cash, whatever he has. He has to pay the amount land. He has to give land for it. So it doesn't matter. There's no point in saying that he has to prove in order to collect from the big one. It doesn't matter if the payment is from the big or the small. He's fully liable. So that doesn't make sense. Rav Asher answers, well, yeah, you're right. This case definitely has to be tam animals, but the resha, the case before, can be mu'ad animals, and the mu'ad animals, that's why the nizak can choose can get paid from whatever he wants. But this is not so good that we have to have the sefa tam and resha mu'ad. It's not consistent. Furthermore, Amar le Rav Acha Sabah le Rav Ashe, Ibe Mu'adin Hayavin, Hayav Gavrami Ba'ale, Vetu Ma'ishenehem. Besides the inconsistency, there's two more problems that Rav Acha Sabah says to Rav Ashe. If it's talking about mu'ad animals, what do you mean hayavin? In the shenehem hayavin, both of them are liable. It's just the owner is liable. He's liable personally. It's not limited to this animal or that animal, or even both animals, right? It's the obligation is on the person, on the mazik. And furthermore, what do you mean both? It doesn't matter how many animals there are or not. The owner has to pay from his land, from his property, from whatever he has. So Shenem Chayavim really does sound like it's talking about from the bodies of those animals, and therefore it has to be a short tam. So we go back and say Ela leolam betamim, and now both cases in the Mishnah are talking about short tam, so that's good. And we're going to follow the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that the nizak becomes a partner with the mazik in owning the animal that gored. So he actually already has ownership of it. But this law would only apply if both animals are present, not when one is lost. You see, if one is lost, then the mazik said, well, the one that you have a partner in, that was lost. So go prove to me that the one that's here is the one that you own. And this right. So if one of them is lost, then the mazik can push him off that way. But if both of them are here, right, we're in the court, and both oxen are sitting nicely in the court, behaving themselves, hopefully, not literally. They're outside wherever, but they're both in existence and in the ownership of the mazik. And so in that case, the mazik can't say, well, you prove which one you have ownership in. The nizak says, I definitely have ownership in one of these oxen, so you definitely owe me something, and whatever you owe me is here present. I don't have to prove which one. You pay me whichever one you want. And that therefore chayavin shenehem means that the liability of the mazik will come from either one of them, right? And the nizak does not have to prove which one it is in order to get paid, because he already has ownership. According to Bishmael, it's more of it's a loan. So then you say, well, you want to collect your loan, prove which one it is. But according to the Rabbi Akiva, it's not a loan; it's already owned. And so he says, okay, give me what I owe. Yeah, give me what I own already. Okay, so this applies, however, only when both of them are present. But if they're not both here, one of them got lost, only then, you're right, as we said above, this is what was bothering us in the first place. If they are not both here, then the mazik can say, bring me proof that the one that caused damage is the one that's here, and then I'll pay you compensation. But in that case, the mazik can claim the one that you own is gone, and therefore you're not going to get it. That's totally different when they're both present, and then the nizak says, I have ownership of one of these, so give me one of them, because you're definitely holding property that belongs to me. Hazran alach ha-meniach. That brings us to the fourth perek. Nu Mishnah, shor shenagach arba'a v'chamisha shevarim ze achar ze. My ox went and gored 4 or 5 other oxen, one after another. We're talking about a shor tam. How could it still be shor tam? After it already gored 3, shouldn't it be a shor mu'ad? We're talking about a case where, for example, I was never warned. I can only become a shor mu'ad because you have to give me warning so that then I can keep it safer. But they didn't get a chance to warn me in the meantime, and so therefore it remains a short tam. Okay, so now it's a short tam, and it gored 4 or 5 other oxen that were belonging to different people. Yeshalem lacharon shebahem, I have to pay the last one first. V'im yesh bo motad, and if there's still left over, let's say mine is worth 200, and it caused just $20 worth of damage to the last one, so I only have to pay him 10. So there's still a lot left over, and so then the surplus goes to the one before him, and if there's still surplus, it goes to the one before him. So if it gored 3 people and the last one got $10, and the one before also I'm owed $10, I'll give it to him also, and then one before as well. But if not, let's say mine was 200 and the last one I caused 400 of damage, and I have to give the whole thing to the last one. That's it. Only the third one gets the last one gets any payment, and the second and first one get 0. And so here's the rule: acharon niskar diber b'meir. The last one gets the most gain, the one before gets the second most gain if there's anything left over, and so on. The Gemara will have to explain why. Why should the last one get paid first? Shouldn't the first one get paid first? All right. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon is also going to go backwards, but he doesn't say that the last one, that the second to last one gets, if there's surplus, the second to last one gets paid in full, but rather he has a more complicated algorithm that we're also going to have to explain. Mine is worth 200, and it goes in gores another one that's worth 200. We're talking about now a simple case first, where mine only gored just 1 so far. And since let's say a case where the nevela is not worth anything at all, so your damage is 200, and I have to pay half of that. So then we split the difference, and mine is worth 200, so you take 100 and I keep 100. Okay, that's a simple case. But now, chazav v'nagach shor acher shaveh 200, hacharon notel maneh v'shelefanav ze notel 50 zuz v'ze notel 50 zuz. Let's say before I actually give the payment over. So, because once I give the payment, then that's it. This is done. We sell the animal, we split it, whatever. We're talking about now, in the meantime, I didn't give payment yet, and my ox went and gored a second one that's also is worth 200, and let's say he killed it, and it has nothing left. So then the last person gets 100, and then the first nizak gets 50, and I keep 50. So the last one gets half, and then we each split the other half. Well, we'll have to see why that is. Now, but first we're going to keep going. The my ox went and killed yet another ox worth 200. Carcass is worthless. האחרון נוטל מנה ושלפניו 50 זוז ושניים הראשונים דינר זהב. The third nizak, the last one, he gets 100, which is in fact everything he's owed, because that's half of what he lost. And the one before gets 50, the second nizak, and the first nizak is 25, and I keep 25. Dinar zahav is worth 25. All right, so this is a complex algorithm. We will figure out why Rabbi Shimon says this. If you want to pause and figure it out yourself, you can try. Okay, Matnitin Maneh, who is the author of this Mishnah? Delak Rabbi Ishmaelu, Delak Rabbi Akiva. It seems like it's nobody. Why? Rabbi Ishmael, Damar Ba'ale Chavotnin, who Hay Acharon Niskar, Rishon Niskar Mi Ba'ale. If we say it's Rabbi Ishmael, well, he says that the payment is a debt. That Mazik owes the damages to the Nizak. If it's a debt, then why are you saying that the last one gets paid first? The first one should get paid first. In any debt, the first person I owe money to the earlier debt I pay first. And so therefore I should pay the Nizak number 1, the full amount that he is owed, and then if there's left over, I'll pay the second one the full amount that he's owed, because the first nizak was owed money before the second nizak. So it can't be to be Ishmael. And if you say it's according to the Akiva, so that means we're partners. after the first one gores, so then now we're partners in the animal, and so on. So now, if it ends up goring three different people, three different animals, why do you say that? Okay, the third one. First of all, why do you say that the last one gets paid first, even if it's partners? The first one should still get paid first. And furthermore, okay, let's say for some reason you think the last one gets paid first. Why would you give then more to the second one? If we're all partners, then 1 and 2 should get an equal amount. Why are you giving more to the second than the first, right? Because partners, if we all share it equally, then we should all split it evenly, or at least everybody get something. If we're partners, everybody should get something. So it shouldn't be that the one right before gets it, but rather it should be split among everyone. And we're actually going to see exactly what the formula would be according to Rabbi Akiva. It will end up being what Rabbi Shimon says over here. But the point is that if everybody is partners, then the last one shouldn't get the only one get paid. If there's, let's say, if it's limited funds and everybody else gets nothing, if it's partners, everybody should share. And if there is more funds and the last one gets paid fully, then the people before them should also get something at least. If it's a partnership, everybody should share in at least some of the profits in some way. So what are we going to do? Amar Rava le'olam ke'Rabbi Yishmael de'amar ba'alei chavot ninhu u'dikash yalach acharon niskar rishon niskar מבעלה, הכה מבעל זקנן, כגון שתפסו נזק לגבות ממנו ונעשה עליו כשומר שכר לנזקין. Rava says, I'm going to explain the first opinion of Rabbi Meir, right? That was the first opinion here. Rabbi Meir is in fact consistent with Rabbi Yishmael. And that what you asked, why does the last one get paid first? The first one should get paid first. That's what it should say. Rishon niskar. The first one should get paid in full first, and then the second one get paid in full, and then the third. Oh, we're talking about a case where the first nizak went and grabbed hold of the goring animal because he was afraid that if I'm the mazik, if I held on to it, I might hide it, or I might lose it, or I may just never pay you, and you'll have a hard time to collect it. So therefore, the nizak number one goes and grabs the animal, holds on to it, and he says, listen, I'm holding on to it until after we finish the court case, and you pay me, then you can have it back. And now, in the meantime, while nizak number one is holding it, it went out and gored a second animal. Well, that for nizak number one becomes like a shomer sachar. He is responsible for it. Okay, he thought he's doing himself a favor by grabbing it to make sure, okay, now I know I'll get paid, I have it. Okay, fine, you're holding it, but once you hold it, you're responsible. And therefore, when it goes out and gores a second animal, then the first nizak is responsible for that. And so actually, nizak number one has to pay nizak number two. Now, then nizak number two, he himself goes and grabs the same animal because he wants to make sure that he gets paid. So he's holding on to this animal as collateral till he gets paid. In the meantime, it escapes from his hold and goes and gores a third animal. And who's responsible to pay for that third animal? Well, nizak number two, because he is a shomer sachar. And therefore, at the end of the day, they all come to court, and the third nizak, who he's not responsible for anything. He didn't grab the animal or anything, but he deserves to be paid in full, meaning half the damages, because still a short time. He deserves to be paid everything that he is owed from nizak number two. So that's it. Nizak number two has to pay him. And if that means he's paying him the full amount of the animal, then there's nothing left. And that's it. No one else gets anything. If there is still some left over, all right, then it will go to the person before him, and so on. Okay, so this is a bit of an ukimta to assume that we're talking about only a case where the second or third one become themselves liable by grabbing onto it. But as long as we make this ukimta, it fits the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael. However, we ask, Ihachi yesh b'motar yachzir shelefanav yachzir laba'alim miba'eleh. Hold on. If so, when in the case where there is extra left over after the second nizak pays the third nizak, and let's say he only pays them $5 and it's still left over, what do you mean that it goes it returns to the one before him? It should say that it returns back to the owner, because the original owner deserves to get back half, right? Because the original owner only needs to pay half of it. The original owner, you see, is only responsible for nizak number 1, not for number 2 and 3. So it doesn't have to go back to the original owner. Good question. Amar Ravina hachikatane im yosh bo motar bin zakav yachzir shelefanav. Now, what it means to say in the Mishnah, you just have to add one word. If there is left over in the amount that will be paid out as damages, that goes to the previous one. In other words, let's say this thing is worth 200. And it gores the first one and kills another 201, and he has to pay 100. Okay, fine. So now the owner deserves to get 100 back, and nizak number 1 also will get 100. But then it goes and gores another one and causes $10 of damage, and then that one goes another one and causes $10 of damage. Okay, so then number 3 will get $5. Number 2 will also get his $5, but there's still 90 left over that will go to nizak number 1. So so that's what it means. If there's left over in the amount that is paid by the owner as damages, that goes back to the previous nizak, which goes back to the previous nizak if there is anything left over. But you're right that half of it will go back to the owner, because the owner is only responsible for half, and he deserves to get the other half back. Good. V'chen ki ata Ravin amar b'Yochanan mishum peshiat shomrin nag'u ba. And this answer is supported also, and these were from Bavel, right? Rava and Ravina in Bavel. But when Ravin came from Medinat Yisrael, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan also the same answer, that the peshiav shomrim, that the second and third, that the first and second nizakin became shomrim by grabbing the animal, and they then were negligent because it went free, and they are then responsible. And so that's why the last one gets paid first, and so on. All right, that's a good answer. Now, b'mayokimta Rabbi Ishmael. So the beginning, the opinion of Rabbi Meir is like Rabbi Ishmael. Ihachi ema sefa Rabbi Shimon omer shor ma shaveh 200 shenagar shor shaveh 200 ve'ana nebela yafa kelum ze notel maneh ve'ze notel maneh. Now, what about the sefa, which is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon? Right? Remember what he said, and then we repeat it. So this cannot be Rabbi Ishmael. Rather, it has atan Rabbi Akiva. This has to be Rabbi Akiva. Let's explain now. The Gemara doesn't delineate it, but assumes that we can figure it out. So let's explain how this would make sense according to Rabbi Akiva. When the my shor, goes and gores the first nizak, and it was worth 200. The carcass is not worth anything. So then the nizak number 1 gets a half, and the mazik gets a half also. So each one gets 100, and we're talking about Rabbi Akiva here. So that means it's a partnership. The mazik owns $100 worth of it, and the nizak owns $100 worth of it, but they own it together. Now, chazar ve'nagach shor acher shaveh 200, hacharon notel maneh, ve'shelefanav ze notel 50 zuz, ve'ze notel 50 zuz. This jointly owned ox went and gored another one. This is nizak number 2, and that one was worth 200, and the carcass is worth 0, and the total damage was 200. So now we have to pay 100, meaning the corporation that includes the mazik and nizak number 1. They together own the animal that was worth 200, that is worth 200, and so they together have to pay half of the amount. So that's what they do. The nizak number 2, he deserves to get 100, and he gets it. He's going to sue our corporation here, and he gets his 100. And in the meantime, the mazik and nizak, who jointly owned it, they have to each give up half of their shares. So the mazik, who owned 100 now, gives up 50, and nizak number 1, who owned 100, also gives up half, so he's left with 50 as well. So that makes perfect sense. Now we have a new corporation, a new partnership that has 3 people in it. The nizak number 2 owns $100 worth of it. Nizak number 1, 50, and mazik, also the original owner, also owns 50. Okay, so now this new partnership we have here jointly owns this animal. Chazar v'nagach shor shaveh 200, ha'acharon notel maneh, v'shelefanav notel 50 zuz, u'shnayim harishonim dinar zahav. So now when it goes and gores yet another, and let's say that also was worth 200, and it's killed and entirely gone, so the third nizak is owed 100. All right, well, we have to pay up. So all of us jointly, we're going to give out of our corporation, we're going to give 100 to the last nizak, which makes perfect sense. Now, we each share in that loss proportionally to what the share that we have. So therefore, the second nizak, he owned $100, so he's going to have to pay 50. He's left with 50. Whereas the nizak number 1 and the owner each owned 50, so they will each have to give up half of that, and so they are each left with 25. So nizak number 1 pays 50, he's left with 50, and the first 2 have 25 each, and therefore the nizak gets the full amount. So you see, if you just could think of it as a partnership, as a corporation, a corporate entity, and the corporate entity pays the last one, because each one becomes and now there's actually a new corporate entity that has 4 people in it. So, I mean, in practice, they're going to have to sell the animal and split it. And split the money, but we're talking about where they didn't yet just split the money, right? And they didn't yet sell it and split the money. And in the meantime, before they got a chance to do that, it went and gored all these times, and you end up with that result. Okay, Atan Rabbi Akiva. So that is Rabbi Akiva. So that is very nice. Amar Torah d'shutafehu, who says is partnership. But now the problem is Resha Rabbi Ishmael v'Sefa Rabbi Akiva. You're telling me that the first half of the Mishnah, which was the opinion of Rabbi Meir, is following Rabbi Ishmael, and the Sefa, which is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, is following Rabbi Akiva. The truth is that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon are both students of Rabbi Akiva. So really, do we want to say that? And the answer is Amre'in deha amar leShemuel leRav Yehuda shinena shavok matitin v'ta batrai resha Rabbi Ishmael v'sefa Rabbi Akiva. Yes, we can in fact say that, because after all, Shemuel told his student Rabbi Rav Yehuda, he said, sharp one, right? Leave the Mishnah. This was a previous case that we saw, where also there was a Mishnah that seemed to be each half was different opinions, and over there the Shemuel said, forget your interpretation of the Mishnah, trying to make it all consistent. Follow my interpretation. And in fact, yes, sometimes the Resha could be Ishmael and the Sefa could be Rabbi Akiva. Truth is, it's easier to apply that in this case, because the Resha and Sefa are in fact 2 different opinions. So even though it's true, Rabbi Meir is a student of Rabbi Akiva, but not every student always agreed with his teacher. Could be that Rabbi Meir in this case says, I agree with Rabbi Ishmael. And so it's actually a lot easier in this case to say that, in fact, they are 2 different authors, and each of these 2 different opinions is following one of the earlier Tanaim. To support this claim, Itmar Nameh Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hikdisho Nizak Ika Benaihu. Rabbi Yochanan, who from Eretz Yisrael, remember we already saw support from Eretz Yisrael to this to the interpretation that we had above, that the Resha is Rabbi Ishmael. He in fact says that the difference between Rabbi Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon in this Mishnah is if the nizak makes it hekdesh. Well, remember, that was also a difference between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva. So therefore, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Ishmael, who say that this is a loan, and therefore the nizak has no ownership in it. So if the nizak says, I'm making it hekdesh, it's not hekdesh. Whereas, according to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon, who say it's a partnership, if the nizak says, I'm making it hekdesh, then it is at least partially made hekdesh. And so Rabbi Yochanan, we see, also agrees with this interpretation, that half of it is Rabbi Ishmael, and the second half is, in fact, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Incidentally, this last line here, Itmar Nameh, and the name of Rabbi Yochanan, is in parentheses in the Vilna printed editions. If we look at the chart here, you'll see only in Vilna it's in printed edition. It's in parentheses. In the prior printed editions, it is not in parentheses. It's a legitimate statement. In the manuscripts, it is in some and is not found in some. It's not found at all in the Florence and Escorial manuscripts. It is in Munich manuscript. And it's in parentheses. I mean, it means just crossed out in the Hamburg manuscript. So anyway, this definitely was in previous printed editions. The printed edition, the first one, is based on a manuscript that we no longer have. So that actually counts itself as a manuscript. So, it ends up being more than 50-50 that the line should be in. So that's that line. All right, now on to the last sugya. This sugya is going to discuss different denominations of money. This is relevant because in our Mishnah, instead of saying 25 dinar, it uses the phrase dinar zahav. A dinar zahav, a golden dinar, is worth 25 silver dinar. When you just say standard dinar, you're talking about a silver one. And so when it's talking about 100, that was talking about silver dinar. By the way, dinar, plain, is silver dinar, and that's the same as the word zuz. Zuz is probably a Greek word that comes from Zeus, because maybe Zeus's picture was on those Greek coins. Anyway, zuz is the same as a silver dinar. A golden dinar is worth 25 silver dinar. This will be relevant in the following discussion about a sela. There's two different types of sela, and we're going to try to figure out which one applies here. Tenan hatam toker lechavero noten lo sela. There's a Mishnah later on that says if someone slaps his friend, slap doesn't cause much injury, but it does cause embarrassment. How much is that embarrassment worth that he has to pay? A sela. We're going to ask in a minute what kind of sela. There's a small one and a big one. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Yosef HaGalili Maneh. He says Maneh, we're meaning 100 silver dinar, which would be a lot more than a sela. Now, we have a case. One guy slapped his friend, and Rav Tovia sent a question to Rav Yosef to ask him, how much does he have to pay? Now, obviously, Rav Tovia knows the Mishnah, that's a sela. But his question is, sela suri tenan or sela medina tenan? Is it a Tyrian sela? Tyre was a big city, where the denominations are more. Medina means provincial over here. This is like, in a big place, an important place like a dollar. A US dollar is worth more than a Canadian dollar. Because Canadian, that's like a province. It's out in the middle of nowhere. Is that even a real dollar? So that if it's worth less. Same thing here, the word sela in Sod meant it was a high amount. It was actually worth 4 dinar. So that would still be a big difference between Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says 100, and Tanakama says only 4. That's if it's a suri, that's the bigger denomination. Or is it a local sela, which is only half of a dinar, right? Which would be much less, right? It would be instead of 100, Tanakama says only a half of a dinar. Ends up being, that's an eighth of the Tyrian one. Okay, so that's the question. Does he have to pay 4 dinar, or does he pay half of a dinar? And so let's see. Amar le tenituha ushnayim arishonim dinar zahav. Rav Yosef proves it from our Mishnah. Now, our Mishnah doesn't talk about a sela, but it does talk about a dinar zahav, and it talks about the different cases where you have to split it. And it ended with the case of there's 3 nizakin. The third one gets 100, the second gets 50, and the first nizak and the original owner mazik get 25. All right, so then it ended with that. Now, v'isa kada techtane tana sela medina niflog v'nitne ad teresar v'sela. First of all, we're assuming that the entire Mishnah is going to use the same denomination, right? At least this Masechet. And so if the Tana of this Masechet, Baba Kama, is using local Sela, that's worth half of a dinar, then they could have added another step in our Mishnah and said, what if there's a fourth Nizak? Then that fourth Nizak, remember we made a partnership, and the partnership would have to pay him half, which would be 100. And then the third Nizak would get 50. And then the third Nizak would get 50. And the second Nizak would get 25. And the first Nizak and the Mazik would then each get 12 and a half. If it was using the lower amount, then the Tana here should have added another step, because then you would have a smaller denomination to say 12 and a sela which is half a dinar. From the fact that our Mishnah does not do so, that means when it says sela, it's assuming the bigger sela, the Tyrian sela, which is worth 4 dinar. And that's why the Tana of our Mishnah didn't go an extra step, because it didn't have a smaller denomination. So it ended where it did. All right, that's Rav Yosef's proof that you're going to have to make this guy pay 4 dinar. However, Rav Tovia said to him, that's not a good proof. What, do you think our Tana should just keep talking and talking like a peddler, right? 2 for 1 sale, peddler keeps talking. He doesn't stop. The Tana should keep going forever, and as long as there's a small denomination, you're going to go another step. We got the point, right? With 3 steps, we understand the algorithm. We were able to figure it out. And so this is not a proof. It could be that a sela is in fact the smaller half a dinar, and nevertheless, our Mishnah got his point across, so he rejects that proof. All right, now we have a nice story there, but that story is not conclusive. So now we want to know, Mai have Allah, what is the answer? Pashtuha meha de amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav kol kesef amor batorah kesef suri sheshel dibrehem kesef medina. We answered the question finally from what Rav said, that anytime we have a denominations mentioned in the Torah, that we assume the bigger denomination of Suri, whereas any statement of the rabbis, meaning including the Mishnah, is the local currency, and that is only that's only half of a dinar. So there you go. The final answer is, if you slap someone, you only have to pay a half of a dinar. Now, if that sounds to you like a small amount, it also sounded like a small amount to the victim of the story that we were already talking about, because here's the continuation of that story. Amar lehu gavra, the victim that was slapped after he was told that he only gets half of a dinar. So he told the judge, Rav Yosef, in that, remember the case was referred to Rav Yosef, and who said, Ho'il, and the victim said, Ho'il falgaduzuzahu la ba'ena nitbe le'aniyim. What are you going to give me for the slap? Only half of a dinar? Forget about it. I don't want it. Just give it to poor people. Then, as he was after a few minutes later, Hadad Amale, Nitbe Nihale, Eziel Vebri Be Nafshai. Then the victim says, I changed my mind. Instead of giving it to the poor, give it to me. I'll get a sandwich with it. At least I'll get something out of this deal. I got slapped, so it's not worth it, but all right, I'll get a snack. Amar le Rav Yosef, kevar zachu be'aniyim. Rav Yosef says, sorry, you already pledged it to the poor people, and that's it. The poor people already acquired it. Even though you didn't give it to them physically, that's it. You already have to give it to them, and you are not getting the money. Anan yad aniyim anan. Amar Rav Yehuda, amar Shemuel, yetomim enan serichin peros bol. And even though there are no poor people here to merit it right now that can acquire it, if a poor person picks it up, it's paid by the perpetrator, and the poor person gets it, then that's it. The transaction is done. He says, even though there's no poor people here, here, Rav Yosef says, I, as a judge, can act as the hand of a poor people. I can acquire it on their behalf. Where do we see that a judge can do a transaction on behalf of poor people? And well, as Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shemuel, that for orphans do not have to write a piddos bull. If someone owes money to an orphan, the orphan doesn't have to write a piddos bull in order to collect it after Shevi'it, because the whole point of a piddos bull is that a person that is owed money transfers that debt to the Bet Din, so the Bet Din can collect it on his behalf. But when it comes to orphans, the Bet Din already is working on their behalf, and so they are already controlling their debt and acquiring on their behalf. And the same thing is for poor people, that the Bet Din is going to work on their behalf, and therefore I, as a judge, Rav Yosef says, can collect it on their behalf. So sorry, this small amount that you were upset that you got, and now at least you want to go get a sandwich with it, even that you cannot have because you already pledged it. And so too we have a baraita from Rami Bar Chama, who said that orphans do not have to write a piddos bol because the Bet Din takes care of them. And in fact, Rabban Gamliel and his court were the fathers of orphans. This comes from the Mizmor 68, that says, Avi Yatomim, B'dayan Almanot, talking about God. God is Avi Yatomim. The Yatom has no father, God will be their father. And that's true in heaven. And here on earth, who's going to fulfill that role and make sure that their cause it will have a champion? So that's the Bet Din, and Rabban Gamliel made sure to take that responsibility very seriously. All right, we end with a funny story. Hanan Bisha Teka Le'lahu Gabra. There was a guy named Hanan the Wicked. He was just a troublemaker, and he slapped a certain guy. Ata lekamed Rav Huna. So they came to Rav Huna to judge the case. Amar le zil havle palgad zuzah. Rav Huna, right, who knew what the previous sugya knows that this is the punishment for the embarrassment for slapping someone is half of a zuz, right? Remember we said zuz is the same as a silver dinar. That's one selah. Let's go pay a zuz. Havale zuzah makah. Now, he has to pay half a zuz. Hanan had a bad coin. Coins would often get defaced or rubbed off. You have a coin that's worth, and here, one zuz, but if people would go and they would clip off a little around the edges. This is why some of our coins today, like a quarter, has ridged edges. That's because in olden days it was made out of real valuable material, and then if you just clip off a little of the edge, you could still use it, right? You could still buy things with it. The money changer and the store owner will still accept it, but if you do it to enough coins, you can shave off a little and get some extra money. So Hanan Bisha, maybe he's the one that clipped these coins in the first place, if he's so wicked. Anyway, he has this bad coin, and he needs change because he has to pay just a half a dinar, half of a zuz, but he has a whole zuz. So ba'ed mitzvah le mine palga de zuzah. He wanted to give him half of a zuz, lahava mishtakel le, but there was no one who wanted to take the zuz to give him change for it because it was a bad coin. So now Hanan's like, oh, now what am I going to do? I can't get change for my bad zuz. So he had a good solution. Tekat le acharina vihabeni hale. Hanan slapped the victim again, and this is okay. Now I owe you 2 halves of a zuz. That's a whole zuz, and so he gave him the bad coin. I think that's pretty funny. The solution to a problem not being able to get change because he has a bad coin in the first place. So, hit him twice, and now he gives the entire thing. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.